Oh, I think I'm here. Let's make sure. Yep. Okay. Video. I wanted to talk about brain stuff. And, then I got just distracted by Piro's drivel. He just keeps trying to justify his seems argument. It seems, like plants are having a living experience. And I mean experience. They're aware, or conscious, or whatever you want to call it. In microbes. They're running away. They're afraid. They're terrified. It's just so bad. That sort of distracts me because I want to talk about big brain, and he wants to belittle, contextualize in a preposterous manner what exactly is happening inside of consciousness. And the fact that, the substance of what it is this learning environment. We're conscious because we're able to learn. That's what it facilitates. I think that's where the value in it came from. It's the fact that it provided this opportunity to compare different strategies and pick one, which, create even strategies. Build them with your own thoughts. Model. Run the model of reality you possess and see different outcomes. And this requires a lot of brain, not a little bit of brain, a lot of brain. Human beings aren't very conscious the first few years of their existence, at least the first two, let's say. And yet he thinks a microbe is born, actively engaged in the world, sensing and feeling and wanting and desiring, and needing to satiate desire. And that somehow plants are even doing this, which would be absolutely ludicrous, considering they can do nothing substantially. There's always a price to these kind of things. Like I say, our body spends a good deal of its energy, a good percentage, running the brain. And if it could run the brain on microbe power, I think we would have evolved such a brain. But anyway, I don't want to argue that nonsense. It's drivel. So anyway, the interesting thing about us is this whole idea of choice. My Misery Me titled the video something like that. It really wasn't. It was sort of about choice, but it really wasn't. But anyway, but this idea of how we decide, how our brain makes decisions. And I ended one of my videos, I think, with a pretty good line. I guess the Professor Anton one. Yeah, the Nick one. Something like having the good, rational programs win out over the more crude, base desire, the mechanisms of your nature, and have the intelligent programs somehow define your identity. The disciplined programs, the cautious ones, the careful ones, the deliberate ones, the ones that have been constructed through thought and personal experience and time and all of that, maturity even. And that's sort of a very interesting, I think, ground for thought, is to try to dissect how this hierarchy of your identity is constructed. Conditioning's a big part of it, in terms of that's the immediate response mechanism, is through this method of reinforcement, positive and negative reinforcement. Oh, look at those trees, gnarly. Anyway, this positive and negative reinforcement, and over time it coalesces into a disposition that's kind of rigid inside of us. certain things seem like they will always be either very positive or very negative, and that would be very difficult to migrate from those personal preferences or tastes. When some new element comes into our brain, something what we consider a new element, new idea, a principle, an ideal, and it's in conflict with that basic nature, like say the fact that I'm rather short-fused, I fly off the handle, as they say. That tends to be my personality. And yet I know that that's not a good idea. That my emotional reactions just get in my way most of the time. I mean, sometimes they do provide some entertainment, but beyond that, overall it's probably a negative, like being drunk or something. Once in a while you're funny, but most of the time you're just a pain in the ass. So, here's a thing about myself. I have for a long time had a willingness to migrate off of, to become a little more cautious and disciplined in how I react when people do things that piss me off. That I would just take it and just walk over it and step past it, instead of feeling some sort of need to meet the challenge, to run my horns through the motherfuckers, all their sons and daughters and however else I can get to them. That reaction is, I know to be, kind of immature, childish, wasteful, pointless, stupid, inefficient. So I have knowledge, and yet I still haven't yet been able to apply the knowledge to the deepest parts of my personality. I would argue that I probably have to the parts where I can, that are less pressed, where there's less pressure to react quickly. Then I have time to remember the principle, for the principle to arise, show itself, and say something pertinent on the subject. But it hasn't built it in, even though it's an endorsed concept, it hasn't been endorsed enough yet. All the players inside of me haven't voted in the affirmative, and it just hasn't reached enough of a majority yet to be able to own the brain space in some substantial way, to recondition me. Not quite. Really. But, even making this video makes me think that, maybe that's the kind of reinforcement. I just need to maybe say it out loud a few times, that this is something I ought to work on. And saying it will likely make my brain more conscious of it. Will keep working at it. But anyway, so again, I'm not going to be able to diagram the explicit function of the brain, just a model of it, a metaphor, an analogy to how it does this hierarchy, how it establishes what will become these the dominant features of personality, the training and the retraining of it. Maybe that's another good word to use. It's how you sort of have to practice to do something, to get the muscle memory, a musical instrument or some other skill, sports or whatever. Practice will help perfect the form is correct. So if there's a certain form is correct, you can practice that form and acquire that technique and develop a muscle memory, a reflex that is consistent with that moderation, that modification of your method. And in terms of how we psychologically react, there's likely some capacity to do the same thing internally in terms of attempting a reconditioning. But it is difficult. If it wasn't difficult, the people who were, say, transgender, some other circumstance, it might be very easy for them just to think themselves into another sexual orientation. And, that would be nice, but it doesn't seem very plausible. That unfortunately, once the condition is written, it's hard to rewrite it. So there are levels of depth to conditioning, I suppose. And so we're sort of arguing about reflexes that are not written in stone, like the reflexes of how you walk or how you throw a baseball. These are mechanisms that you do have some power to augment. And I would suppose that some of your emotional reactions are more mutable than others. You can get to them with an understanding, and you can attempt to retrain your brain to react differently. And when I say you, I mean merely the understanding, the program that's now talking about programs. I now have a program in my brain that understands the concept of programming and is aware in terms of associating itself with the other programs in my brain that are associated with this mechanism we like to call control or choice. Even though it's all a matter of dominoes falling, these programs are altered. The rows, the alignment of the dominoes is changed by each interaction we have with the world. And these programs are constantly modified, and different pathways are created through this thinking, feeling, experiencing thing. So as the program runs, the program modifies itself. And this might be part of the nature of what consciousness is having a modifiable program, to be running a program that's actually modifying itself as it runs. It's changing the code with each interaction. And this code would be in the circumstantial arrangement of the words I have associated with each other through my life experience, and these bigger categorical concepts that are, say, larger theme, directional vectors of program that we can sort of define and describe. You sort of know you're familiar with these general themes of your consciousness in terms of the reoccurring ideas and notions, the kinds of what worries, what fears, and then even the logical, the knowledgeable, educated programs. The programs that, like for me, for the last year or so, or two, I've been sort of seeking in what I'm observing in the world, metaphors or connections, thoughts, comparisons to a theme that's running inside of me that, regarding physics and the nature of particles or quanta, and the nature of its function, how it moves throughout the universe, and even relating that to my understanding of consciousness, in the sense that understanding that what's happening through the movement inside of me is a whirlpool is being created, a spiral, let's say, and it's very centrifugal, and it's in its essence filtering now the stuff that comes in, and it filters out nonsense and bullshit and silliness that doesn't fit into the foundational, rock-solid knowledge. And so that's the sort of the nature of logic, is creating a filtering mechanism that, again, is self-refining, self-cleansing through this logical process. It keeps looking for things that match the pattern and things that don't match the pattern, and slides things towards the category or away from the category. So the theme has a nuance and a flow, but the general idea of the theme stays the same as it refines and gets more and more concise. Through interactions like this, even, it's still being worked on, having chips knocked off of it, and being arranged in my subconscious. So when I hit the switch to start talking about it, this is where it's gotten so far. This is the knowledge base of ideas and concepts it has tied together, and that, you know, my brain now on the fly takes those concepts and applies its muscle memory to create a sentence structure and coherency to English language, which isn't really on the subject. But the point is your brain doesn't choose anything. It just decides. It just cascades through the Rube Goldberg mechanism, the hugely elaborate Rube Goldberg that has involved in it a projection, theater, all kinds of complex nuance that is part of the foundation of the mechanism. And and there's just this byproduct that we call what we did or what we are, and it's constantly being modified. So anyway, enough of the video. Kind of gray and colder than I thought, sort of underdressed and whatnot. Anyway, this grass is going to need some work this spring. Eek. Anyway, till next time.